The desert didn't care who you were in 1983. It didn't care if you were a sheriff, a ranch hand, or a kid with more pride than sense. Out in northern Arizona, where the sun baked the ground into cracked plates, and the nights dropped cold enough to make steel ring, justice wasn't a promise. It was a rumor, and sometimes it was buried. That summer, Sheriff Hollis Granger vanished. Officially, his disappearance went down as unresolved. Off the record, locals said the desert swallowed him. Folks whispered different stories, most of them half drunk, all of them missing pieces. But one detail always stayed the same. The last people to see Sheriff Granger alive were the Barlow boys. 3 brothers, poor even by local standards, raised on a busted patch of leased land outside Cottonwood Ridge. And the reason they crossed paths with the sheriff, the reason their story begins, was so pathetic, so small, so embarrassingly insignificant, that most people refused to believe it, a $20 debt. But that was the kind of place Arizona could be in '83. It didn't take cartel money or politics or a feud passed down through generations. Sometimes all it took was pride, fear, and a man with a badge who thought he could lean on the wrong family. It started on a Wednesday. Never trust a Wednesday in the desert. People were tired, tempers were dry, and nobody had been paid yet. The Barlow brothers, Eamon, Travis, and little Pete, had spent the morning repairing a fence for old man Kilpatrick, work that was worth maybe $10 an hour now. But back then, they were lucky if they got $5 each and a leftover sandwich. By late afternoon, they were sunburned, irritated, and flat broke. And that was when Sheriff Granger's cruiser rolled up to their property, kicking up a column of red dust so tall it could have been seen from Flagstaff. Granger wasn't a complicated man. He talked loud, drank louder, and his reputation lived on fear more than respect. He'd been complaining for weeks that the Barlows owed him money. $20 he swore he'd loaned Eamon after a bar fight. Eamon denied it. Granger didn't care. He stepped out of that cruiser with the kind of swagger that told the world he never expected a problem he couldn't beat down. What he didn't expect was desperation. Not the Barlow kind. Not the kind that builds in a home where meals run out before the weekends, where boots get passed down until the soles shred, where a man's pride becomes the only currency he won't surrender. And that afternoon, Sheriff Granger made the mistake of pushing that pride too hard. He put his hand on Eamon's chest, shoved him, called him trailer trash, said that $20 wasn't about money, it was about showing respect. Eamon didn't shove back, Travis did, and once that started, things moved fast. Much too fast for anyone to think about how it might end. Sheriff Granger went for his baton before he went for his radio. Travis ducked. Pete grabbed a shovel out of instinct, maybe fear, maybe stupidity. The sheriff swung. Eamon caught the blow to his shoulder and dropped to one knee, and then the sheriff slipped. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a simple misstep in loose dust. But when a man with authority slips, pride falls with him, and that's the part he'll fight tooth and nail to get back. The blow he aimed at Pete wasn't meant to kill. At least, nobody thinks it was. But when the metal glanced off the boy's temple, Pete dropped like a sack of feed. That was the moment everything changed, because the Barlow brothers didn't move the same after that, didn't think the same, didn't breathe the same. A sheriff had just knocked out their little brother. And they knew, every one of them, that if Granger got back in his cruiser, if he got on the radio, if backup came, it was the Barlows who'd vanish, not him. So Eamon acted first. He grabbed the baton. Travis took the sheriff's legs, and Sheriff Hollis Granger fell to the ground, kicking, cursing, reaching for his holster. Eamon panicked. Travis panicked. And what happened next wasn't planned, wasn't clean, wasn't clever. It was chaos. Sharp, ugly, breathless chaos. When the dust settled, Sheriff Granger wasn't breathing, and the Barlow boys stood over him, hands shaking, hearts pounding, knowing nothing would ever be the same. They looked at each other, looked at the sheriff, looked at the desert stretching in every direction. Eamon said the words first. "We bury him." Travis didn't argue. Pete was half conscious, blood in his hair. There was no time to think. They hauled the sheriff into the bed of their rusted Ford, covered him with a tarp, and drove off the property like the devil was chasing them. Not toward town, not toward help, but toward the high desert scrublands, where the ground was soft, the trails were empty, and the nearest witness was a circling vulture. What the Barlow boys didn't know, not yet, was that burying a sheriff in Arizona wasn't the worst mistake they'd make that night. It was just the first. The Ford rattled across the washboard dirt road so violently that the bolts in the dashboard groaned. Eamon kept his grip white-knuckled on the wheel, the muscles in his jaw working like something was chewing him from the inside out. Beside him, Travis stared straight ahead, but the reflection in the windshield showed his eyes flicking constantly toward the tarp covering Sheriff Hollis Granger's body in the truck bed. Pete sat between them, holding a rag to his head where the sheriff's baton had split the skin. His breathing was shallow, the way a kid breathes when they're doing everything they can not to cry. Nobody talked. Words were dangerous now. Words made things real. The sun had already dropped behind the jagged spine of the Mogollon Rim, painting the desert in a bruised purple glow. An hour earlier, the air shimmered with heat. Now it cooled fast enough that a thin mist of dust trailed behind them like smoke from a dying fire. Eamon finally spoke, not a dramatic statement, not even a plan, just 3 words, cracked and hoarse. "Deeper out, father." Travis nodded once, still not looking at him. Pete swallowed. "How far?" Eamon didn't answer because he didn't know. He only knew one thing with certainty. If they didn't get the sheriff buried before sunrise, everything was over. The entire county would be crawling with deputies, state police, maybe even feds if they made enough noise. 3 poor brothers from a forgotten patch of land wouldn't stand a chance explaining how a sheriff ended up dead on their property. The desert kept secrets, but only if you gave it something back. They drove past the abandoned mining road that locals avoided out of pure superstition, past the wind-carved rocks where the ground dipped into soft basins of sand, past old cattle trails that led nowhere, used only by ranch hands who'd been dead for decades. It was nearly dark when Eamon finally braked. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died with a dry rattle. The headlights flickered against a patch of land, so empty it looked like God had forgotten it during creation. Nothing but sagebrush, tumbleweed skeletons, and stretches of pale earth that shifted under your boots like something alive. "This is good," Eamon said. Travis didn't think it was good at all, but he didn't argue. He climbed out silently, walked to the truck bed, and stared under the tarp. "I'll do it," he muttered. Eamon shook his head. "We all will." Pete stayed inside, the pain behind his eyes pulsing. He watched through the cracked windshield as his brothers uncovered the sheriff. Under the tarp, Granger looked smaller, less like a threat, more like something that should have been left alone. The desert wind swept fine red dust over his clothes, over his badge, over the dark crescent of dried blood near his temple. Travis swallowed. "Pete stayed alive because of us," he whispered. "We didn't have a choice." But the desert didn't care about choices. It didn't care about right or wrong. It only cared what you left behind. They dug with urgency, shovels slicing into the soft soil. The ground here was easier than at home, where the caliche layer turned digging into a fight. Here it was, almost forgiving. Sand mixed with loose stones, thin roots that tore easy. The hole didn't need to be perfect, just deep enough. Still, Eamon kept glancing toward the horizon, watching the sky turn indigo, then ink black. Every gust of wind sounded like tires crunching gravel. Every distant creak sounded like a door of a cruiser being pushed open. "Faster," he said. "We've got to go faster." They dug until their shoulders shook, dug until Travis's palms split, dug until the hole was nearly chest deep. Pete watched from the truck. His breath fogged the glass. It felt like watching his own fate being scooped out of the earth. When the grave was ready, the brothers hauled the sheriff down into it. He hit the bottom with a muted thud that echoed only inside their minds. Pete finally stepped out of the truck, swaying slightly. His voice was a whisper. "We ain't saying a prayer?" Eamon stared at him, not cruel, but exhausted. "That's for men who died clean." Travis wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist. "Just cover him, before anything finds us." But the desert already had. They filled the grave fast, pushing dirt over the sheriff until the earth swallowed him. Each shovel of sand felt heavier than the last, as if the ground resisted, as if something beneath didn't want to stay buried. When they finished, the grave looked disturbingly natural. No mound, no marker, nothing to hint that a lawman lay underfoot. Only the scuffed prints of their boots betrayed that anyone had been there at all. Travis kicked sagebrush across the disturbed soil, disguising it further. Eamon brushed sweat from his neck. Pete leaned against the truck, dizzy. "We go home," Eamon said. "Act normal, nobody hears a damn word." But normal had died with Hollis Granger. The road back felt different, heavier. The Ford seemed to groan under a burden that wasn't physical. They reached their property just past midnight. The night had turned unnervingly silent. No cicadas, no wind. Even the dogs kept quiet, as if sensing something wrong clinging to the brothers' clothes. Eamon parked behind the shed, where the truck couldn't be seen from the road. He didn't turn off the engine until the last light in the distance disappeared. Inside the house, a patched-together structure of wood, tin, and the kind of repairs born of poverty. The air was warm, stale, and thick with the smell of fried onions from earlier in the day. Their mother was still working a night shift at the diner in Ridgeway. She wouldn't be home until dawn. Thank God, Eamon thought. Pete slumped onto the couch. Travis dropped into a chair. Eamon stood near the window, staring out into the dark like a man waiting for something to step out of it. No one spoke for a long time. Then Pete's voice quivered. "What do we tell Ma?" Eamon didn't look at him. "We don't. She ain't involved." "But what if they—" "Pete," Eamon said sharply. "Stop. We did what we had to. Now we keep our mouths shut." Travis exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "The sheriff's got deputies, friends, folks who owe him favors. They'll come around asking questions. Hard ones." Eamon finally turned. His eyes were hollow. "Then we stick to the same story. He came by. He left. That's it." Pete leaned back, trying to steady his breathing. "What if they don't believe us?" "They don't need to believe us," Eamon said. "They just need to not find the body." But the body was the least of their problems, because the sheriff hadn't come alone. He hadn't told them, but the sheriff had spent that morning in a heated argument with someone else, miles from the Barlow property, someone who saw him drive in the direction of their home, someone who'd been looking for an excuse to start trouble, and that someone would show up sooner than any of the brothers could imagine. By the next afternoon, the desert seemed to hum with tension. A storm far off the ridge sent low rumbles through the ground even though the sky overhead stayed clear. The heat pressed against the earth like a hand against a throat. Eamon was out by the shed, cleaning the dirt from their shovels, making sure they looked as if they'd never touched anything resembling a grave. Travis checked the truck tires for stray sagebrush or clumps of sand that might give something away. Pete sat on the porch, staring at his scraped knuckles and the dried blood under his fingernails. They were so caught up in covering their tracks that none of them noticed the dust cloud rising from the road until it was too late. A truck, big, loud, coming fast. Eamon froze. "Get inside," he hissed. Pete scrambled. Travis jogged toward the porch but stopped halfway as the truck pulled into their yard. A jacked-up Ford F-150, silver paint dulled by years of sun, a bumper sticker peeled at the edges, a rifle rack visible through the rear window, and stepping out of the driver's seat, Wade Coulter, a rancher, a hothead, and the last man anyone wanted sniffing around. He pushed his sunglasses up onto his head and spat into the dust. "Barlow!" he shouted. "Get out here!" Eamon stepped forward slowly, every nerve screaming. "What do you want, Wade?" Wade tilted his head, smirking. "Sheriff Granger came looking for me yesterday. Wanted to talk to me about something I ain't inclined to discuss. Then he took off toward your place." Eamon said nothing. Wade's eyes narrowed. "Funny thing, ain't nobody seen him since." Travis swallowed. Wade lifted his chin. "So I'm thinking, either he's ignoring folks, which ain't his style, or something happened while he was visiting you." Eamon held steady. "He came by about a debt he thought we owed. He left. That's it." Wade stared at him too long, as if trying to read the truth in the lines of his face. "You boys look nervous," Wade said. Pete shifted behind the screen door. Wade's grin widened. "Mind if I look around? Seeing as the sheriff's missing and all?" Eamon stepped forward. "We mind." Wade's hand hovered near his belt. Not the holster. He wasn't law, but he always kept a hunting knife clipped there, and the desert sun glinted off its metal. "You boys hiding something?" he asked quietly. Travis took one step closer, voice low. "You need to leave, Wade." The air tightened. Something crackled between them. A standoff without guns, but with stakes just as high. Then Wade released a slow breath. "All right, but don't fool yourselves. Folks talk in this county, and you Barlow's got a reputation for trouble." He climbed back into his truck, turned the engine, leaned out the window. "If I find out you're lying," he tapped the side of the truck with 2 fingers, "I'll be back." And then he drove off, leaving a trail of dust that lingered like a warning. Eamon waited until the truck was out of sight before he spoke. "He knows," Pete whispered. "He knows something's wrong." "No," Eamon said. "He suspects. There's a difference, but it didn't matter. Suspicion could kill just as fast as certainty in a place like this." Travis kicked the dirt hard enough to send pebbles flying. "We can't have people sniffing around. If Wade goes telling folks we're acting strange, we stay calm," Eamon interrupted. "We don't run. We don't fight unless we have to. We keep our story straight." But that night, when the house grew still and the desert cooled again into eerie silence, none of the brothers slept. Every creak sounded like boots on gravel. Every shadow outside the window felt like an approaching deputy. Every howl from a distant coyote sounded too much like the cry of something digging. Because fear isn't quiet. It echoes. It hunts. And by morning, word of the missing sheriff had reached every corner of Cottonwood Ridge. People wanted answers. And the desert wanted more. By sunrise, the desert felt wrong. Not different, not louder or quieter. Just wrong, as if the land itself knew a man had been buried in it. The Barlow brothers woke to the crackle of their mother frying eggs. She'd gotten home from her shift an hour before dawn and moved through the kitchen with the same tired rhythm she always did. The only difference was the radio. She kept turning the dial. Static, more static. Then a burst of a news bulletin. "Sheriff Hollis Granger was last seen near Cottonwood Ridge. No contact since late yesterday afternoon. Search efforts will begin at first light." Pete felt the blood drain from his face. Travis looked like a man trying not to be sick. Eamon kept perfectly still. Their mother didn't notice any of it. She was exhausted. 8-hour shifts at the Ridgeway Diner did that, and the radio was just background noise to her. She cracked eggs one by one, humming under her breath, but when she finally turned away from the stove, spatula in hand, she paused. "You boys look pale." Her eyes moved from Pete's bandaged head to Travis's swollen knuckles to the tired slump in Eamon's shoulders. "What happened?" Eamon stepped forward before either of his brothers could speak. "Fence work yesterday, long day. Pete slipped on the rocks." She frowned. "That cut looks bad." "It's fine, Ma," Pete murmured. She didn't push, but she didn't believe it either. Mothers always know when their children are lying. They just choose when to pretend they don't. She slid the eggs onto chipped ceramic plates. Eat. You boys need strength today. Travis froze. Strength for what? The deputies were at the diner, she said. They're organizing a search party. Sheriff Granger's missing. She wasn't suspicious, just concerned, the way any person in the county would be. They want volunteers. Half the men in town are going out looking. Silence stretched across the kitchen like a drawn wire. Pete lowered his gaze. Travis stared at his plate. Eamon forced a swallow, even though his mouth felt like sand. Their mother sighed. Maybe you can help too, Eamon. Sheriff Granger wasn't an easy man, but he kept this county in order. Eamon's stomach twisted. If there was anything more dangerous than guilt, it was pretending innocence too well. We'll see, he said quietly. Morning hardened into a blistering midday, and with it came the search parties. Trucks, horses, deputies, volunteers, folks with binoculars, maps, bottles of water strapped to their belts. Cottonwood Ridge hadn't seen this much activity since the wildfire of '78. The Barlow property sat right at the edge of the search grid, which meant trucks rolled past every 20 minutes. Men leaning out the windows, scanning the land, tipping their hats when they saw someone outside. Eamon pretended to fix the water pump. Travis walked the fence line. Pete stayed inside, curtains drawn tight. At noon, a sheriff's deputy finally pulled into their yard. A tall man, sandy mustache, hat pulled low. Deputy Carl Henders, Granger's right-hand man, the kind of officer who didn't smile much and liked to push his weight around when the sheriff wasn't looking. Eamon felt Travis stiffen beside him. The deputy stepped out of the cruiser and hooked his thumbs into his belt. "Boys," he drawled. "Deputy," Eamon answered. Carl glanced around the property, taking in the Ford parked behind the shed, the patched-up fence, the dust-swept porch. His eyes lingered just a second too long on the shovels leaning against the wall. "You hear the news?" he asked. Eamon nodded. "Ma told us. We're looking for Sheriff Granger. Last confirmed report puts him driving this way. You see or hear anything unusual yesterday?" "No, sir," Eamon said evenly. He came by, asked about a debt he thought we owed. He left. Carl studied him. Deputies weren't trained like FBI agents. They didn't know interrogation tactics beyond intimidation and silence. But Carl had a hunter's instinct. He could smell fear, and the brothers were reeking of it. "What time did he leave?" Carl asked. Travis stepped in. "Late afternoon." Carl scratched his jaw. "Funny, Dan Latimer saw Granger's cruiser pass his ranch a couple hours later, headed deeper into the ridge." Eamon felt a pulse of fear hit his ribs, but he didn't flinch. "Then he must have had more stops to make." "Maybe." Carl leaned closer. "Mind if I look around?" Eamon's throat tightened. "You say yes, and he finds something out of place. You say no, and you look guilty." But the decision was taken out of his hands. Their mother stepped out onto the porch. "Carl Henders," she said, crossing her arms. "You've got no warrant, and I won't have you wasting my boys' time. They didn't do nothing. They told you already." Carl glanced at her, not annoyed, but hesitant. Everyone in the county respected Mrs. Barlow. Tough, honest, proud. She wasn't the kind of woman you dismissed. "I'm just doing my job, Mom, and they're trying to do theirs. Unless you've got cause, you can leave." Carl didn't argue, but he didn't leave without planting a seed first. "If you think of anything at all," he tipped his hat, "you let me know." He climbed back into his cruiser and drove off, kicking up dust that swirled around their yard like smoke from a slow-burning fuse. When he was gone, their mother looked at them, really looked. "What did you boys do?" No yelling, no panic, just a low, tired question. Eamon's mouth worked, trying to find a lie, but Mrs. Barlow shook her head. "I don't want to know," she said quietly. "Not yet, but whatever it is, it's big. I can feel it." Her voice cracked. "You boys stay close. Don't go running around with folks already whispering behind your backs." She went back inside. The brothers said nothing. By early evening, the search had spread north toward the canyon. Word traveled fast across the county. The sheriff's disappearance had turned into a hunt. Travis paced the yard like a trapped animal. "We should have buried him deeper, or picked another spot, or—" "No," Eamon cut in. "The spot's fine." "Is it?" Travis snapped. "We don't know. Cougars dig in that area sometimes. Coyotes too. If animals get to him—" "They won't," Eamon said. But the answer didn't land right. He didn't even believe it himself. Pete sat on the steps of the porch, staring out at the land. His head still throbbed, but his thoughts throbbed harder. "What if someone followed us?" he murmured. Eamon's heart dropped a beat. Travis froze. "What?" Eamon asked carefully. Pete kept his voice small. "When we were driving out there, I remember seeing lights, far behind us. Way far, maybe miles. Why didn't you say anything?" Travis snapped. "I didn't know. It could have been someone else, a rancher, anyone. I thought I imagined it." Eamon stared into the desert until his eyes blurred. If someone saw their taillights leaving the property, if someone followed their path into the scrublands, if someone saw them dig— No, it couldn't be. But the seed was planted. Doubt grows fast in fear-soaked soil. Night came again, heavy, and cold. The brothers couldn't stay indoors, not with their nerves stretched to breaking, so they sat outside near the dying remains of a fire pit, watching the sky darken into a vast, star-punched void. Travis kicked at a rock. "Wade Coulter's out there. He hates Granger. Hated him for impounding his cattle back in spring. You think he'd, try to pin this on us? Make it look like we did something worse? He already suspects us," Eamon said. "He's not the only one," Pete whispered. Eamon turned. "What?" Pete hugged his knees. "When you were talking to Carl today, I saw someone across the ridge, watching." Travis shot to his feet. "Who?" "I couldn't tell. Too far. Just a silhouette." Eamon felt the temperature drop further, not around him, but inside him. The desert was wide open land. Anybody could be watching from anywhere. And in Arizona, 1983, guns were as common as water. "Get inside," he said, but Travis shook his head. "No, we need to check the grave." Eamon stared at him. "You want us to go back out there? If something was disturbed, we need to know. If animals got to him..." Pete's breath hitched. "Or somebody else." The silence between them felt brittle. Eamon made the decision with the weight of someone who'd already crossed one line too many. "Get the truck." They drove without headlights for the first mile. The moonlight was thin, but enough to outline the dirt road. The desert stretched around them like a great sleeping beast. Pete pressed his forehead to the cool window. Travis scanned the horizon. Eamon drove fast, too fast, trying to outrun the fear clawing up his spine. They reached the burial site after 30 tense minutes. The wind had shifted the ground since last night. Tracks from coyotes crisscrossed the area. A tumbleweed skeleton had rolled nearby. Nothing looked dramatic, but the desert didn't need dramatic to be dangerous. Travis jumped out before the engine even stopped. He ran to the grave, flashlight shaking in his hand. Pete stayed rooted in place, unable to move. Eamon walked slowly, fearing what he might see. When the flashlight beam hit the grave, Travis swore under his breath. The earth was disturbed. Not a lot. Not like something had been dug up fully, but enough. Deep claw marks in the surface. A few tufts of moved soil. The faint smell of something rotten rising from beneath the ground. "God," Pete whispered. "Oh God." Travis looked at Eamon, voice trembling. "Something's been at him." Eamon scanned the tracks. Coyote, maybe bobcat. Could have been scavengers. The desert didn't care whose body it fed on. But then Eamon saw something else. Boot prints. Not theirs. Smaller tread, deeper heel, heading toward the grave, then away from it. Someone else had been there. Travis saw it too. His face went pale. Who the hell was that?" Eamon's breath shook. "I don't know." Suddenly, Pete's voice cracked in panic. "There's someone out here." They all spun. On the ridge above them, a silhouette, still, watching, unmoving, backlit by the moon, a dark outline against the silver sky, a figure with broad shoulders, a hat, maybe holding something long in one hand. Travis grabbed the shovel in instinct. "Is that..." He didn't finish. The figure vanished, not walked away, not ducked, just slipped out of sight like they were never there. Eamon's heart slammed against his ribs. "They know," he whispered. "Whoever that is, they know." Pete grabbed his arm. "Eamon, what do we do?" Eamon stared at the grave, at the tracks, at the ridge where the shadow had stood. "We go home," he said, "and we wait." "For what?" Travis asked. Eamon didn't answer, because he didn't know, but the desert did, and by morning, the danger would no longer be lurking in shadows. It would be knocking on their door. There's a strange kind of silence that settles over desert towns after a killing. Not the haunted quiet you hear in stories, but something tighter, like the whole place is holding its breath because it knows something is coming and nobody can stop it. Red Mesa had that silence in the early hours of May 3rd, 1983, the morning after Sheriff Harlan Briggs vanished into the earth behind the Barlow property. Nobody yet knew he was dead, nobody yet knew he was buried, and nobody yet understood how deeply three boys, raised by a man who believed the world owed him fear, were about to drag the entire county into a nightmare over $20. But by sunrise, the ripples had already begun. The investigation that started wrong. Deputy Owen McLean was the first to notice Harlan's cruiser still gone from the station. That in itself wasn't unheard of. Harlan often handled things personally, especially when drunks or hotheads were involved. He had an old-school belief that most Arizona problems could be solved by talking face-to-face, man-to-man, without paperwork. But he'd always check in, always. McLean wasn't the type to panic. He wasn't even the type to worry. But the logbook said the sheriff left on a simple retrieval call, a follow-up about a bounced fine payment, something Harlan had intended to handle before breakfast. When a man disappears on something that trivial, the smallest detail turns suspicious. McLean made the first of many wrong decisions that day. He assumed the Barlow brothers were idiots, not criminals. The Barlow house, where the lie began, the Barlow property wasn't much more than three structures: a sagging ranch house, a detached garage full of junked trucks, and the big tin-roofed shed behind both, something their father once used for welding work before he drank himself out of employment. When McLean pulled up, he already knew the boys by reputation. Everyone did. They weren't the type you feared. They were the type you rolled your eyes at. Eddie, the oldest, 24, a temper like lit gasoline. Ray, the middle one, quiet, watchful, hungry for someone to follow. Jonah, the youngest, 16, all nerves and trembling hands. The desert sun was barely crawling over the ridgeline when Eddie stepped out onto the porch, shirtless, still smelling of last night's sweat. Jonah lurked behind him. Ray stayed inside. McLean called out, "Morning, Eddie. Your truck out front? I see you're up early." Eddie scratched his jaw, feigning casual. "Had chores." McLean stepped closer. "Sheriff Briggs stopped by here last night?" And for a split second, for less than the time it takes a man to blink, Jonah's eyes widened. McLean saw it. He wasn't stupid, but Eddie recovered fast. Too fast. "Sheriff? Nah. Haven't seen him since that raffle last month." McLean didn't buy it, not fully, but he didn't push either. The worst thing you can do early in an investigation is show the suspects that they're suspects. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the yard, casually, hands in his belt. Nothing unusual. Dust, tire tracks, beer cans, the usual Barlow debris. What he didn't see was the disturbed patch of earth 30 feet behind the shed, where a hastily dug grave was cooling in the morning shade. What he didn't hear was Ray whispering through the cracked kitchen window, "Eddie, he knows something." What he didn't smell was the faint metallic tang beneath the soil, where Sheriff Briggs lay face down, his badge still clipped to his shirt. Guilt is never silent. Back inside the house, the brothers fell into a panic that only deepened with every passing hour. Eddie slammed the door hard enough to rattle the glass. "It's fine," he snapped. "We stick to the story." But Ray wasn't convinced. "He asked too many questions." "He's a cop," Eddie said. "That's his job." "Yeah," Ray muttered. "But Harlan doesn't just vanish. They'll come back." Jonah paced like a trapped animal. "We ain't cut out for this," he whispered. "We should have called someone. We should have." "You want to go to prison?" Eddie barked, grabbing him hard by the shirt. "You think they'll listen to why it happened? You think they'll care the sheriff pulled a gun on us first?" Jonah didn't respond, because that wasn't true. Harlan never pulled his gun. He never even reached for it. He never got the chance. But Eddie said it with such conviction that Jonah tried to believe him, tried to rewrite the memory, tried to reshape guilt into something survivable. Ray stared at his brother. "You keep twisting the story, Eddie," he murmured. "One day even you won't know what's true." Eddie didn't answer. He didn't need to. He'd already decided that truth was whatever kept them out of a cell, and buried men can't dispute a story. The town stirs. By noon, Red Mesa was humming with rumors. The sheriff's radio remained silent. His cruiser was nowhere on the main roads, not at any of the usual spots, not parked outside the coffee shop where he sometimes lingered too long over refills. People noticed. Because the thing about small desert towns is this: everybody is always watching everyone else. Kids playing outside saw Harlan drive toward the mesa the night before. A rancher on the highway saw him turn onto Barlow Road. A waitress remembered him mentioning a quick errand before closing. The puzzle pieces were lining up, even if no one had the full picture yet. Around 2 o'clock, Deputy McLean called in the first official notice. "Sheriff Briggs unaccounted for. Last known direction, East County. Beginning search." What he didn't put in that report was the suspicion gnawing at him like a slow infection. He was last seen heading toward the Barlows. The brothers split as the hours dragged on. Eddie ordered them to divide tasks. Ray was to dig up the grave that night and move Harlan's body deeper into the desert. Far enough they'll never find him. Eddie wanted the body gone before anyone came asking harder questions. Jonah was supposed to burn the shirt Eddie had worn, the one still stained with a dark smear that wasn't as invisible as Eddie liked to believe. And Eddie himself, he planned to drive into town and act normal. "You two stay quiet," he instructed. "No slip-ups. If they ask, we never saw him." Jonah's hands trembled. "What if they search the place?" Eddie looked him dead in the eyes. "Then we pray they're too stupid to dig." Jonah swallowed hard. "Eddie, we didn't mean for this to happen." Eddie stepped closer, towering over him. "We're not killers," he insisted. "We're just people who made a mistake." But even Ray felt the lie in that room. It clung to the air like smoke.